This is by Haute Compass, how an Indian merchant became Cambodia's first king. A story of Indianization. Doing good. Awesome.
India and Southeast Asia have a rich, overlapping history. In art, architecture, language, and religion, India and Southeast Asia share striking similarities. But how and when did Southeast Asia become so Indianized? The answer is hidden in an ancient Cambodian love story. Cambodia's origins are anything but ordinary. The love between a native princess and an Indian merchant served as its foundation. Yup, Cambodia's first king was an Indian merchant, a man known as Kondinya.
But I guess if you go to a less developed country with a ton of money as a merchant, it's probably not crazy hard to become a king, yeah?
Kondinya's story begins in the 1st century CE. His historical name, Kondinya, provides the first insight into his life, because it's not his true given name. Kondinya is a reference to a Brahmin community that populates the Andhra Orissa coast, a region commonly known as Kalinga. Kalinga was a powerhouse of early Indian trade, and their merchant mariners were called Sadhava. Kondinya himself was a Brahmin Sadhava, and it's likely that he was wealthy and well-connected. He was the owner of one or more large merchant vessels, or boidas, the expertly crafted, square-sailed ships of Kalinga. There was at least one major manufacturing center for boidas at Golubai on Lake Chilika. Lake Chilika also served as a port of departure for merchants. As a large body of water with a narrow opening to the sea, it offered a natural, protected harbor. But before we turn our focus back to Kondinya, let's take a look at the bigger picture. In this era, foreign trade was so extensive that port cities like Nagapatnam had bazaars crowded with crates of imported goods. This trade is associated with a long period of rising prosperity in both South and Southeast Asia. But trade wasn't limited to the east. In the west, Rome had just conquered Egypt, and thanks to the revitalization of old Egyptian maritime routes, Romans and Indians began trading extensively. Roman senators were hyper-concerned about hyper-deflation, as so much of their silver was being depleted by being sent to India through trade. So with all that in mind, let's get back to Kondinya. Kondinya set sail for South...
Kind of a random thought, but I always wondered, I actually know very little about the Roman Empire. I feel like I know some stuff, right, like most people, but I've never, looked deep into it. And, it lasted for such a long time, right? But did they ever try to fully take over the world, the Roman Empire? Did they want to? They just didn't manage to? I don't know, because they were always expanding, right? Well, for a long time, until, shrinking. I don't actually know, yeah.
Southeast Asia in the 1st century CE. But how did he actually get there? In that era, Indian mariners would wait for seasonal monsoon winds coming from the northeast. Using these winds, they quickly sailed down the coast, all the way to Sri Lanka. Along the way, mariners would conduct trade at urban centers on the coast. Then, from the northern tip of Sri Lanka, Indian mariners would cut a straight path to Southeast Asia, across the Bay of Bengal. Severe weather and rampant piracy made this crossing extremely dangerous. But dangers notwithstanding, they would arrive in Southeast Asia at the mouth of the Andaman Sea. From here, Indian mariners could continue into the Straits of Malacca, hug the southern coast of Sumatra all the way to Java, make a brief land crossing at the Isthmus of Kra. We don't know which specific route Kondinya took, but we do know that he eventually found himself in the Gulf of Thailand, ready to do business. Kondinya could have been carrying a variety of high-demand Indian goods: cotton textiles, jewelry, and metalware. In addition, he could have been carrying Western goods. All of this valuable cargo put a target on Kondinya's back. Pirates would almost certainly be lurking on the fringes. And wouldn't you know it, they were. Kondinya's ship was surprise attacked by local pirates.
It's so interesting, for a long time, when I think of pirate, I think of, the one rebelling against the crown and fighting the English, right? That's the pirate idea, but technically there's been pirates all throughout the history of, seafaring, right? But I guess none of the other, era of pirates have been as famous, and so they're never really mentioned, but pirates has always been a thing. And outside of that one era of, the pirates fighting the British, it's never been very romanticized. All other era of pirates is kind of seen as bad, we say, right? It's interesting.
He and his crew fought bravely and successfully repulsed the pirates, but the ship was damaged during the attack. Condinia was forced to beach the ship for repairs. While beached, Condinia and his crew must have feared a second attack, but they needn't have worried, for the pirates had been employed by a local chieftain, whose daughter, Soma, had fallen in love with the handsome young merchant. It was Condinia's bravery during the attack that won her affections. Soma sent over a marriage proposal. Condinia must have been surprised, or perhaps he feared for his life should he reject it. In the end, he accepted the proposal. This is considered a landmark event in Cambodian history, the establishment of its first true kingdom, with an Indian merchant sitting on its throne. But Condinia and Soma's marriage was not the last of its kind. It would serve as a blueprint for many Indian Southeast Asian political marriages.
I mean, I'm still kind of confused because he came with only one ship, right? So there's no way he had, like, you know, that insane amount of money on just one ship, no? To become king and rule the kingdom. I don't know.
Marriages to come. We're interested in the capital T truth. So why did Soma actually marry Condinia? And why were Indian Southeast Asian political marriages so common? In the late classical era, Southeast Asia was characterized by fragile, politically fractured states. But change was on the horizon. With rising trade came an influx of wealth, and new agricultural developments led to a population boom. State reforms were seen as necessary to address these new challenges, and that's where Indianization comes in. Indian political and cultural traditions had already solved these societal challenges. India was already densely populated, wealthy, and urbanized. For hundreds of years, in fact. Simply put, Indianization was a solution to the problems that Southeast Asia now faced. And who better to implement Indianization than Indians themselves? Educated Indians were imported in droves. For example, Brahmin clerks were brought from India to serve in Southeast Asian administrations. And most of these Indian immigrants married local women, often noble women. Access to nobility gave Indian...
So, like, tell me if this is fucked up, but is this like a positive colonization? Like, well, it's not colonization because they're not like actually taking over by force, right? But you know, yeah, no, actually that's stupid. No? I take that back. I was gonna say, like, in some colonization, sometimes they bring, like, you know, the modern world, like technology, system of government, and try to advance the country super fast. And this seems to be what they're doing here, but like not in a taking over the country to do it, more in, like, you know, mixing the people to do it. Does that make sense?
Immigrants institutional legitimacy. In other words, they were given power and the means to wield it. Chinese historical records are illuminating in this regard. These records make reference to several Indian immigrants who became royals in Cambodia. Reports include one king of Funan, Chandana, yes, another immigrant from India, who sent a gift of elephants to Jin Dynasty China. Another one of these reports include an Indian Brahmin whose name also translates to Condinia. This Condinia II supposedly heard a voice telling him that he was a rightful ruler of Funan, and so he journeyed to the east. When he arrived in Funan, reports indicate that he was welcomed warmly and was selected as their new king, presumably by marrying a local princess. The Chinese report even...
I wish things worked out that great in my life. I mean, I have a dream about something and then I do it and everybody's like, yeah, I mean, you're right, you need to be king.
Points out, Condinia changed all the laws to conform to the system of India. Active yet peaceful social transformation is rare, and it's even more rare for foreigners to lead the transformation. That's why the Indianization of Southeast Asia is such a surprising historical moment. To summarize,
it does sound fake in the sense of, like, every other story like this is, you know, like the people of the country won't be happy with it. There'll be civil war with some tribes or some sides not wanting this to happen, or there'll be a straight up war with the king of the already established country. You know, like, obviously this sounds like positive, you know, improving the country for the better, but in most other, like, historical event like this, it ends up with some massive war and conflict. It's a classic.
Foreign immigrants were brought in to fill the ranks of elite society. These new immigrants were actually encouraged to shape the local culture so that it more closely resembled their own. And all of this happened without threats, violence, or other pressure. But Indianization wasn't a one-time event. It was a continuous process occurring over a 1,000-year period. The the story of Condinia and Soma is just one of many in this larger saga. So returning to our original question, why did Soma choose Condinia? The answer should be obvious now. Condinia was exactly what she needed to succeed in an increasingly Indianized world. As a Southeast Asian noblewoman, Soma could offer institutional legitimacy. Condinia, on the other hand, was a wealthy and well-connected merchant with extensive political and commercial networks in India. Condinia's Indianness was an advantage with real-world, measurable consequences. It's worth noting, Soma's family was not that powerful. They controlled only a small sub-region of Khmer territory, but Condinia's arrival changed their fortunes. Together, Condinia and Soma expanded this humble state into a large and prosperous kingdom. Perhaps this rapid expansion was made possible by Condinia's Indianness. He had the tools to fast-track the process of Indianization after all.
Indianness.
Between the 4th and 8th centuries CE, several prosperous empires emerged in India and Southeast Asia. Each of these entities were heavily engaged in the Indianization process, the Guptas and the Pallavas exporting their culture, and Srivijaya importing it. But this wasn't entirely a one-way exchange. Southeast Asia had at least some impact on the subcontinent too. Consider the Pallava dynasty. The Pallavas were a wealthy and powerful trading empire whose origins have been the subject of a spirited debate. Early historians suggested Persian roots, while later historians suggested Tamil or Telugu roots. These historians had an incomplete view, however. Recent scholarship has revealed a hybrid South Indian and Southeast Asian origin. See, the Pallava dynasty began with the South Indian king's marriage to a queen who was referred to as a Naga. The Naga queen may have actually been Southeast Asian. Consider the term Naga itself. The term Naga, which denotes a race of mythical snake humans, has long been associated with the people of Southeast Asia. In Cambodia, for example, Khmer royalty made Naga iconography essential to their identity, and Naga carvings litter their temples and palaces. Perhaps this connection shouldn't be too surprising, given what we know about the Pallava dynasty. The Pallavas had a long history of inserting themselves into international affairs in the rest of Asia. For example, in the early 700s, they entered into a mutual defense pact with Tang Dynasty China. But let's explore another story from the dynasty's past. In 731 CE, the Pallavas were on the brink of collapse. Their king, Parameshvara, suddenly died in battle, leaving no direct heir. There was a danger that rival kingdoms would encroach on their territory. The Pallavas had to find the proper king to take the throne, and they had to do it quickly. A formal delegation was created to find Hiranya, the descendant of an ancient Pallava prince named Bhima. Bhima was an ancestor of the now deceased king, so his descendants, Hiranya and others, would have a right to take the throne. But there was a catch. Hiranya was not to be found in India, for Bhima had traveled abroad, married a Southeast Asian princess, and had become the ruler of a foreign kingdom through that marriage. Now I'd say that's a familiar story, don't you think? So with all this in mind, the Pallava delegation boarded a ship to Southeast Asia to speak to Bhima's descendant, King Hiranyavarman. It's believed that he was the leader of the Champa kingdom, located in modern-day Vietnam. When they arrived at Hiranya's court, the delegation was warmly received, and soon enough, the delegation got down to business. They asked for one of Hiranya's sons to come back to India and take the Pallava throne. Hiranya's youngest son agreed to this mission. At just 12 years old, he made the journey to South India. He was given the regnal name Nandivarman II and ascended the Pallava.
It's such a thing with like the ancient world, right? I mean, you know, we've kind of gone the opposite direction, right? Where like everybody is old as fuck when they become president and kings these days, right? Like for the most part, it's always like the oldest of all people, right? I feel like the average is probably like 70. But back in the day, they would just like not care and just get someone super young. And if you see a lot of the time, someone was like super young like that, they would still have like some kind of a big assistant guy, like a regent or something, I think. But it's kind of crazy how that used to be so normal, right? Like you would think in this situation, like, you know, I understand it's part of the tradition, like you want someone with the blood of this person, so whatever if they're 12, but wouldn't it be better to just get someone competent who's like, you know, older and has already proved themselves to rule the country? I don't know. Because like, you're just getting some 12-year-old kid and hoping that he's going to be a good ruler just because of his blood. I know that, you know, blood was much more important back in the day, but it always shocks me, you know, because again, like, I don't actually think people of the ancient world were stupid, right? Obviously not. Huh? And yet, like in a case like this, like just get someone competent, not a 12-year-old. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure he's gonna say that this worked out, but it's more luck than it worked out. Like they have no reason to know that this kid would actually be any good.
A throne. Rival claimants and power-hungry nobles felt this was a wrong decision. After all, Nandivarman II was a foreigner. To quell this concern, Nandivarma II and his supporters made efforts to highlight his true Pallava heritage. But here's some food for thought. What made his background true is that he was of mixed Indian and Southeast Asian ancestry, just like the original pairing that founded the Pallava dynasty. Nandivarman II would grow to become an extremely successful king. He was perhaps the greatest of the Pallavas, presiding over an empire at its apex.
I mean, it works sometime again. Like Alexander the Great was like what 16 or something when he inherited the kingdom. What's his name? The king from the north of Sweden, Augustus something. Like he was also like insanely young, and yet wildly successful. It happens, but still, like most of the time, if you put like a teen on the throne, that's a terrible idea.
An economic and cultural golden age. And all this he accomplished as a foreigner. Nandivarman's foreign origins seem to have ensured his continued interest in Eastern affairs. For example, inscriptions written on his behalf have been found in northern Malaysia, in the kingdom of Kedah. Interestingly, this kingdom is located in the Bujang Valley, which roughly translates to Valley of the Serpents. And in Sanskrit, the term Bujang is a synonym of the term Naga. Very curious indeed. Nandivarman II is, like Kondinya and other pioneers before him, a symbol of Indianization and the deep connection between India and Southeast Asia. Only today, after 6 centuries of Chinese, Arab, and European influence, has the contribution of India been neglected. And now you know.
I mean, fair enough. I know. Okay, very interesting. Very interesting. I didn't know it, now I know. That is true. That is very true. Very interesting.